What's going on, guys? My name is Richard. Welcome to this week's Stock Market Outlook video. As always, we'll talk through the action of the leading stocks in the market, the potential true market leaders, then we'll cover how the indexes performed over this past week. We'll also cover how my previous watch list, or in this case, my relative strength list, performed over this past week. And we'll also talk about sentiment from a few different indicators, the IBD Big Picture article, and also the GMI Signal from wishoneupwall.com. So we'll be covering a lot today, so feel free to skip around to what interests you the most using the timestamps which are in the description below. So starting things off, let's first talk through the charts of the potential true market leaders. And really quickly, I will be changing up this list because some of these stocks aren't quite leading anymore, and there are also some stocks that need to be added to this list. So if you have any suggestions, let me know down below in the comment section. And throughout this video, if you enjoy my work, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new. It really does help me out and my channel. So first things first, we've got apps, and overall you can see it had a killer week of 46%. You can see that after its earnings report, you can see a nice recovery on that day on high volume, and then it was pretty much straight up right to all-time highs. And overall, in my view, the most actionable day would have been this Tuesday right here, where it retook all those key moving averages and also the prior green line, which is the previous all-time high it set all the way back in 2000. So apps looks very strong, and I would expect it to consolidate a little bit or potentially just break out straight away through this pivot. So moving on, we've got TTD, which had a blowout earnings report and a great gap and go move on Friday. And overall, you can see a lot of big up volume here, which is great to see. Relative strength is right at all-time highs, and prices at all-time highs as well. And just in general, if we open this up here, you can see that there's a lot more stocks at price and relative strength, new highs. And last week, we saw a lot of stocks below the 21 EMAs and 50 SMAs, so the leaders have improved dramatically. Moving on, we've got our next stock, which is Fiverr, and it was up 27% this week. And overall, you can see it had a nice kind of bounce off the 10-week and 50 SMA, and now is right at all-time highs with the relative strength in new high ground as well. Next up, we've got NLS, which broke this downward trend line last week and also kind of bounced off the both 21 EMA area as well as the lower Bollinger Band here, and is now right back at all-time highs, although you can see that volume is lower, which is something to be wary of. So overall, the price action is decent, but I would like to see more volume coming in as it breaks out next week. Next up, we've got SQ, which also had a strong move after its earnings report on Friday. And overall, you can see big volume coming in, big blue bars here, and RS is at all-time highs, price at all-time highs. It's acting very, very well. Next up, we've got EMPH, and you can see it had a great recovery on this day after its earnings report, and then had a follow-on day and a breakout on Thursday, and then a nice consolidation, actually a move up on Friday. So it's showing a lot of accumulation signs, and solar has been one of the strongest industries, and I would expect that to continue. So moving on, we've got Roku, which also had a breakout on Friday on huge volume, and their earnings report was very strong, and you can see a nice bounce off the 50 SMA 10-week area down here as well. Then a nice green dot as it retook the 21 EMA, and overall this is acting very, very well, RS line and price into new high ground. Moving on, we've got NEO, which continues to outperform, although it is definitely getting extended at this point, and I would expect it to rest at some point in the near future, form another base, and I'll definitely be looking to get back into this stock, which has been a great stock to trade recently. You can see it behaves very, very well, stays above that key 21 EMA, and likes to break out of these downward trend lines. So I'll look for another opportunity in this stock, but at this point, it's too extended to be actionable for me. Next up, we've got Net, which also had an earnings gap up, but you can see it wasn't quite as strong as TTD and Roku and SQ and the others, because you can see it did fade pretty far off its highs. But overall, you can see still large volume coming in. I like this accumulation, and I would expect this to go higher in the near future. Moving on, we've got Etsy, which also moved up well last week. You can see they kind of bounce off the 10-week and 50 SMA area right here. And overall, you can see that it's approaching all-time highs, and I would expect it to breach that in the near future as long as the market is cooperative. But at this point, I would like to see more volume coming in as it tries to take over that pivot. So next up, we've got SEC Limited, and overall, you can see it also broke out into all-time highs. It had a green dot on this Wednesday, and then a gap up day, and then a consolidation day on Friday, so it's acting very, very well. Next up, we've got Snap, which also broke out on Friday, And I love how it kind of held the 10 EMA here after its earnings breakout and showed a lot of strength during the correction. And now it's rewarding its shareholders and breaking out once again. And I love the signs of accumulation, especially this high volume concentration here. So next up, we've got NVIDIA, and overall chip makers are acting very, very well. You can see it's in this kind of double bottom pattern here, looking to break out of this pivot at 589.07 with RS line into new all-time highs. Next on the list, we've got CrowdStrike, and overall this stock only had a 13% move last week as it retook the 50 SMA and 21 EMA, which are now curling up once again. So overall, I would expect this to challenge all-time highs sometime soon, but I would like to see volume coming in at that time. So moving on, we've got AMD, which broke the downward trend line nicely, and you can see the RS line is trending in the right direction, and I would expect this to challenge the midpoint pivot at some point, and then all-time highs in the near future. So next up, we've got CalX, which moved up nicely from its earnings gap up, formed this nice U shape, had a green dot on Thursday, and then a nice consolidation day on Friday on lower volume. So once again, I would like to see this fall through on higher volume and take out the pivot of the breakout high here at 27.78. Next up on the list, we've got Shopify, which also moved up nicely last week, retook that 50 SMA, and now it's acting as support, which is a good sign. So I want to see this continue to move up and break out above this kind of flat base here, which it has been in for quite some time. So overall, keep an eye on this one. It is a great stock when it gets moving, but at this point, it's still within this base. So moving on, we've got Peloton, and overall, this also had its earnings reporting last week. You can see it did kind of fade over the course of the day on Friday, so I want to see a definitive move up on above average volume, hopefully breaking out into new all-time highs. Next up, we've got Pinterest, and overall, after the earnings gap up, it's formed this nice U here, had a teal dot on Tuesday, and then also a teal dot and green dot on Thursday. So price is confirming this move, and it's trending nicely above all these key moving averages with the RS line right at all-time highs. Moving on, we've got XP. You can see it's still kind of consolidating here at around the same level as this prior base and consolidation back here. So hopefully this moves up and breaks out above this pivot. You can see I've got an alert set here at 48.64. And overall, I'm still watching this one, but at this point, there's no clear entry. Next up, we've got DDOG, which had a nice move up and recovery last week, and is now back above the pivot from this flat base at this time. So you can see it's finding support now at the 21 EMA. So I want to see it stay above these key levels, the 50 SMA and 21 EMA, and also the psychological 100 level. Next up the list, we've got Tesla, and overall, I want to see it break this downward trend line here. But at this point, it's back above the 50 SMA and 21 EMA, and now I want to see it start moving up and challenge this pivot at 465.90. Next on the list, we've got Zoom, another former monster stock, and overall it retook the 50 SMA and bounced off it last week, and now is above the 500 level and also the 21 EMA. So I want to see it continue upwards on above average volume and challenge these pivots at all-time highs and also this kind of intermediate pivot at 553.86. Next on the list, we've got TDOC, and overall you can see it's moved up nicely from these intermediate lows, but similar to SHOP, it's still within this overall consolidation phase, and the earliest entry really would be a breakout above this high at 236.80. So that's TDOC, and overall you can see that the RS line is basing along with the price. Next up, we've got Twilio, which you can see also bounced off the 50 SMA and now is finding support near its 10 EMA and 21 EMA. So hopefully this can recover and challenge these all-time highs. And lastly, we've got FSLR, which had a kind of volatile week. It was up and down, and overall it's still around this pivot right here from this kind of consolidation here. But at this point, there's no kind of clear, clean entry. You could kind of draw a downward trend line here and say it broke out on Thursday. But at this point, there's no clear direction in its price, although it is above those key moving averages. So that is a quick rundown of the true market leaders. Let me know down in the comment section what stocks you think I should add to this list. Moving on to the market indexes, let's start with the QQQ on a daily time frame. And overall, you can see that it was within this kind of downtrend channel here. And then we had an expectation breaker on Tuesday and also Wednesday, where it gapped up above the 50 SMA, 21 EMA, and 10 EMA. And really, this was your clue that the volatility was decreasing and we were starting another uptrend. And this is also a fall through day this Thursday on the QQQ. And then we had a nice kind of upside reversal on this Friday as it moved down, tried to fill this gap, although it didn't, and then recovered all the way to be green on the day. So overall, it's acting well, and I would expect it to challenge this midpoint here and eventually all-time highs, but it would be completely normal if we consolidate a little bit here, maybe drift lower and actually fill this gap here before moving higher once again. And the expectation from this last bar is we go sideways or higher. So moving on to a weekly chart, you can see that overall we were up 9.37% on the week with a weekly closing range of 97.3% and a daily closing range on Friday of 86.4%. And overall we are above a rising 10-week and 30-week SMA. So at this point we are in a stage 2 uptrend, and the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or higher. So moving on to the SPY, you can see we're also up in a big way this week, up 7.23% with a weekly closing range of 91.9%. And a daily closing range on Friday of 65%, and we are also in a stage 2 uptrend. And from this bar, the expectation is we go sideways or higher. Moving on, we've got the Dow Jones, and overall it was up 6.85% with a weekly closing range of 90.3% and a daily closing range of 53.4%. And we are also in a stage 1, stage 2 because the 10-week is decreasing at this point, but we are above those key moving averages. And from this bar, the expectation is we go sideways or higher. Next up, we've got the IWM, the Russell 2000 Index, and overall we are up 6.88%, so it's good to see the small caps participating in this uptrend. And overall, the weekly closing range was 82.6%, with a daily closing range on Friday of only 13.3%. But we are in a stage 2 uptrend at this point because we are above an increasing 10-week and 30-week SMA, and the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or higher. Moving on, we've got gold, and overall you can see we had a nice breakout last week above these pivots, these highs of the previous weeks, and overall we are up 3.97% with a weekly closing range of 94.7% and a daily closing range of 74.6% on Friday. So overall we are in a stage 1, stage 2, and the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or higher. Next up, we've got the VIX, and overall you can see a huge drop this week, down 34.61%, which is another reason to be bullish at this time. And overall, the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or lower. Moving on, we've got the XLF, and overall we are up 4.61% with a weekly closing range of 73% and a daily closing range on Friday of 18%. And overall, you can still see that we're kind of consolidating here, but we are in a stage 1 at this time with the expectation from this bar is that we go sideways or higher. Finally, we've got the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF, and overall you can see it reflects the strength of growth stocks last week, up 9.9% with a weekly closing range of 96.6% and a daily closing range on Friday of 78.7% for a very strong week. And overall, we are in a stage 2 at this time, and I would like to see it kind of take out the highs of these previous weeks. And the expectation for this bar is we go sideways or higher. Moving on to the relative strength stocks I picked last week, you can see a lot of them were up over 20%. Again, a lot of them were up over 10%, and we only had 2 losers on the week. So going through the charts quickly, you can see that SPWR broke out into all-time highs on above average volume. Relative strength is also at all-time highs, so it looks very, very promising. NLS, we already covered. PDD also broke out with the RS line confirming as well. This looks very, very strong, and I love seeing the above average volume on that breakout as well. ENPH, we already covered. NEO, we already covered. NET, DQ, you can see, found support at the 21 EMA and had a nice move up on above average volume late last week. So if the market is cooperative, I would expect this to challenge all-time highs relatively soon. ARI also had a breakout above the IPO-based pivot late last week on above average volume, so that's promising. SE, we already covered. Snap, we already covered. CRSR, Corsair, you can see also had a move up to all-time highs late last week on above average volume. JD also broke out on huge volume. This looks very, very strong. And you can see it's just riding that upper Bollinger Band to higher price levels. Inficorp, which merged with Marvel, also broke out last week, although it's just kind of following the price action of Marvel, which also looks very, very strong at this point. You can see a nice move on Friday. And next up, we've got PINS, which we already talked about. MPWR also broke out into all-time highs on above average volume. STAA also had a really nice move on Friday after a nice upside reversal the previous day on Thursday. This was a clue right here. And overall, you can see a very strong chart here, right at all-time highs with the RS line confirming. Adapt Health Corp is also right at all-time highs with the RS line confirming as well. You can see nice volume coming in on Friday, although the price action was pretty poor. SNBR also moved up from this kind of short shelf here, although you can see it isn't on higher volume, which does lead me to be a little bit cautious about this stock. JKS, another solar name, you can see actually sold off on Friday, which isn't a good sign for this stock, but overall it continues to find support at this 21 EMA. MVCR also had a nice move up off the 50 SMA late last week on high volume. Data, you can see, is also right at all-time highs and looks like it will challenge that relatively soon. You've got a pivot at 37.38. And next up, we've got 5in, which also broke out into all-time highs on higher volume. Paycom is still within this kind of consolidation here, although it did try to break out on Wednesday, but you can see it did sell off on higher volume on this Thursday and then recovered somewhat on Friday. PCTY, Paylocity, is a very similar chart to Paycom, and overall you can see once again a sell-off on Thursday, then a nice recovery on Friday. SAM, you can see, is still within this short shelf and is holding near the low of the breakout day, which is promising. Exact Sciences, you can see after this nice move up, it's consolidating nicely above the 10 EMA. Goosehead Insurance, you can see, is holding up well after this breakout. And finally, we've got Reggie, which is still trending down to the 50 SMA, although it did have a nice bounce on Wednesday. So that's a run through of how these high relative strength stocks performed over this past week. And now let's move on to sentiment. So overall, you can see from my Twitter surveys, we had an increase in bullishness up 11% this week, which is a negative. But overall, if we go to the NAAIM Exposure Index, we are still seeing a decrease in this number, which is positive. And looking at the Bulls versus Bears poll, you can see this is actually decreasing at this time. And looking at the put call ratio, you can still see that it's kind of oscillating back and forth in no man's land. So in terms of sentiment, you can see that overall, it's pretty neutral. And it's actually very bullish that this number is still decreasing. So moving on to the IBD Big Picture, you can see that the headline is NASDAQ rises to a 1.5% gain away from all-time highs. Why Q4 could still benefit stock pickers. And overall, they discuss the historic week in U.S. politics and the broad gains in the U.S. stock market. They discuss the falter days on the NASDAQ and also the SPX and Dow Jones. And they also discuss how the market is climbing a wall of worry. And you've got some nice moves from Axon, NVCR, and also QDEL. Moving on, they also discuss some offensive sell rules like taking gains at 25% for most of your positions. And they also mentioned a few stocks which are still building these bases like CHGN, Shopify, and Adobe. And overall, their take is we are back in a confirmed uptrend because of those falter days last week. And overall, they mentioned some leaders up in volume and also some leaders down in volume, JKS, LI, and also Yeti. So good things from IBD. We're back in a confirmed uptrend. And moving on to the GMI Signal, you can see we're also green on this indicator with a GMI score of 6 out of 6 on this past Thursday. So overall, taking everything into account, my current view is we are back in a confirmed uptrend. The leading stocks are acting well. We've got the indexes back above their 50 SMAs. And at this time, I'll be looking to add stocks to my portfolio once they meet my setup criteria. So thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos.